APUSH. This is your Unit 4 test. And basically, this unit is going to cover four kind of major topics, being manifest destiny, civil war, reconstruction, and westward expansion, or Wild West settling of the plains, if you will, for the last part. So understand that manifest destiny, this idea that America should or has a God given right to spread from sea to shining sea, that it's our destiny somehow to take over this continent, that slavery is going to be a big issue with this spreading. And each time that we spread, we're going to have to address the elephant in the room, which is slavery and the potential expansion of slavery. Now, one of something outside of slavery early on, as far as one of our questions, 5440 or fight, we know that is dealing with this Oregon territory that is jointly claimed by Russia, Britain, and even America, and we want it. We have the Oregon Trail. People are leaving from Missouri, and we want Oregon territory. It's a good environment for us to farm, and so we're going to do the long 6-month trek on the Oregon Trail. We're going to skip over a lot of states that have lesser value and make our way to Oregon. So 5440 or fight is basically saying, hey, we are willing to fight Britain for sole possession of Oregon. We deserve it. We want it. Britain somewhere else, and we're on. This is our territory. Okay. Now, and again, the extension of slavery is the essential issue facing political parties. As from the late 1840s on. What are we going to do? If we fight Mexico and we get new territories, are we allowing the Missouri Compromise line to be extended? Are we allowing? It's just a big issue, which that Texas goes into that as well. American annexation of Texas is basically going to be the spark for the Mexican War, even though it takes about 10 years. Mexico wants to be annexed by the United States. The president at the time doesn't want to risk war. And so Texas is going to have to fight by itself, and it's going to get its own, it's going to become its own country for about 10 years. But eventually we want Texas inside the United States. We have a different president, President Polk, and he's going to basically, pick a fight. And when Mexican soldiers on the border kill a couple of Americans, he's going to use that as a reasoning to start the war. And of course, that's going to have profound impact on the North-South relations. Into all this, you have the Wilmot Proviso. Basically, David Wilmot, he's in Congress. He's trying to find a way to keep the peace between the North and the South, but yet we know that we want Mexico. So how are we going to keep the peace? So his idea is to prohibit slavery in any territory acquired from Mexico. For him, that's an easy solve to this problem. Is we will take the land, but we just won't spread slavery. Of course, that the South is going to see this as a threat because eventually they'd be outnumbered in Congress, and slavery would probably get voted out. So they're not going to be on board with this. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, pretty simple one there. After we go into Mexico and we demolish them and make short work of Mexico, it'll be the treaty that ends the war. And we kind of feel guilty for beating Mexico, kind of taking their land from them. So we throw them some money. So inside the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, we're going to take at least a third of Mexico's territory, but we're going to pay them $15 million for it. So we sleep better at night, I guess. Another political party that rises in this time period, and thanks to the issue of Mexico, was the Free Soilers. And Free Soilers are very much against slavery. They think that it doesn't work with American Republican values, of freedom and democracy. They also, some of them thought that it was a threat to Jefferson's vision of a society of independent yeoman farmers. If you're a yeoman farmer, it's hard for you to compete against a large landowner who has a bunch of slaves. So some people viewed it from that perspective. 1848, of course, you have the gold rush in California out at Sutter's Mill. And there's a lot going on in this situation. You got people living in crowded towns, mining camps. You got saloons, gambling halls, prostitution. It's kind of wicked and corrupt, kind of your Wild West view. If you weren't a white miner, if you were a non-white miner, you were poorly treated. You were limited to working on the worst lands. Basically, and if you didn't get there, early bird gets the worm. If you weren't one of the first ones there, you weren't getting rich. The first one struck it rich. Most 49ers, as people become known, work hard for very little pay. They're getting, they'll find little tiny baby nuggets, just enough to keep them going, but they're certainly not getting rich. Many of the failed miners would eventually actually work for wages for large-scale mining companies, or they'd actually turn to farming because it just wasn't profitable once the first few people got there and basically took up all the gold. Compromise of 1850 is another big one. And again, of course, it is following along the lines of the big question, which is slavery and what we're supposed to do with it when we acquire new territories. California, of course, comes in with the Mexican cession. And so there are several things that the Compromise of 1850 does. It admits California as a free state. It makes a stronger fugitive slave law. It puts forth popular sovereignty in the remainder of the Mexican cession, basically meaning that the territories would choose if they wanted to be slave or free. And it calls for the abolition of the slave trade in Washington, D.C. as well. So there's a lot that goes in with the Compromise of 1850. Remember, they had to break it apart and pass it through Congress in segments. As a whole bill, it wouldn't pass, but they break it apart and send it through in pieces and they get it passed. Popular sovereignty, of course, it's dealing with slavery as well. Who has the authority to legislate slavery into territories? President? Is it Congress? Well, with popular sovereignty, we can say, well, let the people decide. And that kind of gets you out of a debate between the president, the executive branch, and the legislative branch on who should decide. So keep that in mind. Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, part of that Compromise of 1850, basically denies these African Americans who have run away any kind of jury trial. They can't testify in their own defense. This makes many abolitionists in the North incensed with rage, of course. And you had to worry about kind of being kidnapped. You'd want to go around with your free papers if you were a Northern black, because if you didn't, you might find yourself being sold back south. Excuse me. Other things that come from Manifest Destiny and that come in with slavery as well. Kansas-Nebraska Act does quite a few things. It repeals the Missouri Compromise. You're splitting Kansas and Nebraska with the idea that Kansas would be a slave state, Nebraska would be a free state to kind of balance, but Kansas is above the Missouri Compromise line. So if you do this, it is repealing the Missouri Compromise line. It eventually led to bloodshed in Kansas, of course. We get bleeding Kansas from the Kansas-Nebraska Act. But it does increase the likelihood of a transcontinental railroad in the north, so that's important. It organizes Kansas and Nebraska territories under popular sovereignty. But we know that there's going to be kind of a lie there because, Kansas will somehow magically become a slave state and the people didn't vote for it. But we know that many people from Missouri crossed state lines there and illegally voted. Lincoln, a few things about Lincoln. Remember, he's the first Republican president. He's a guy that was born poor out in the country. He didn't want to be this yeoman farmer. He enters the middle class through his hard work and making a smart marriage to Mary Todd. He's got a lot of ambition. He was an early Whig and admirer of Henry Clay, the great compromiser. But of course, that he believes that slavery, he can't do anything about slavery. But he just wants to keep slavery from extending out of where it already exists. Now, when it comes time for secession, and we know that Lincoln is going to get elected, and he's not on the ballot in almost every southern state, and they're angry about this because now it feels like their vote. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm about to lose my recording here, so I will come up in a part 2.